Welcome, and thank you all for joining our presentation. My name is Austin Perry, and I will be today's narrator. And on behalf of Drs. Esber Andiroglu and Ali Nader Azab, thank you for watching our presentation on our engineering team's efforts to address global threats to coastal communities through innovation, education, and outreach efforts here in Florida. Our presentation will touch on several key ingredients that has made our program successful, beginning with immediate environmental problems to high-level research, design to deployment, and education outreach to workforce development. These efforts have culminated in new materials and innovations, product deployment to threatened coastal communities, thousands of interactions with students and community stakeholders, and the development of high-paying workforce opportunities to meet industry growth needs. While our program is young and our work is in constant development, our goals remain ambitious: produce products and strategies that help Florida's coastal communities survive and thrive for the next 100 years, and do it in a way that the rest of the world can model. In 2019, a team of University of Miami professors and students designed and created a program focused on the role of STEM education and research on sustainability and resiliency in South Florida for community stakeholders. The program was developed using a multi-level approach consisting of high-level academic research and partnerships with local government, industry, and academic institutions. As we will explain in the upcoming slides, it took extensive efforts to curate concise information and communicate the relevant ideas to all age groups and learning levels. Over the next several minutes, I'll provide a basic background on how these solutions we devise locally can influence coastal resilience plans globally, while touching on the program's priorities, goals, and principles, how the backbone of our program is our work in the classrooms and the labs of the university, how that becomes a force multiplier in our education outreach efforts, how we approach the idea of who and what students are, and how these efforts can combine to create a workforce qualified to carry on and improve upon our work. And lastly, we'll finish with a traditional brief presentation wrap-up. Program priorities. As an educational institution, one priority of the program was to disseminate what we know in these academic areas to South Florida community stakeholders. We doubled down on our efforts to reach new schools, youth organizations, and career development centers in underrepresented communities. Through in-person lectures, Zoom presentations, luncheons, career fairs, and symposiums like this one, we have been able to partner with dozens of schools, reach thousands of students, inform policy decisions, and design good-paying career pathways for university graduates, career changers, and industry professionals alike. For our program goals, our goals were to inform the community on South Florida's environmental problems, update them on the solutions we as a university are developing, and inspire them to participate in the problem solving themselves. And for our program principles, the overarching principles of the program are education, inspiration, technology transfer, and application. There are countless problems we can address. Focusing on what we know and what we are good at communicating can expand our impacts from the research we conduct in our laboratories into action and policy in community resilience. These are our ingredients for a successful outreach effort. We focused on both a bottom-up and top-down approach to how we developed and delivered the big ideas. Our program content is derived largely from the work we do in laboratories, research, development, and practical applications. Through these efforts, we have developed real-world solutions to many of the sustainability and coastal resiliency problems South Florida is currently facing. Close partnerships with communities like North Bay Village, government agencies like Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience, the City of Miami Beach, and a variety of nonprofit organizations have allowed us to take our solutions from the lab and implement them in our communities. As we validate ideas developed by private industry allows us to deploy research outcomes as innovative implementation solutions in the areas that are most susceptible to worsening environmental conditions. Lastly, as the solutions go from small-scale pilot projects into mainstream adaptation, there's a need to train a workforce qualified to work on such projects. The certification programs by the university provides industry credentials to graduate students and mid-career professionals. Additionally, certificates are an avenue used to accumulate college credits to apply towards advanced degrees in engineering, building design, and construction. This facilitates the knowledge transfer from laboratory to classroom to worksite. Now, practical application. Our ability to practically apply academic ideas to real-world situations provides legitimacy to our program and the ideas we share with the community. These types of projects guide the content of our community outreach program. They help define what the problems are and what community leaders are doing to innovate solutions. Upon successful implementation, these solutions can be exported to other cities, states, and countries, furthering the positive impact of the program. For example, Collective community efforts led by university has resulted in multiple opportunities for applications of resiliency solutions in our community. Take this one, for example. This is where we designed and deployed an experimental pilot prototype project proposed as a localized wastewater treatment alternative for failing septic systems to the community. We had a task, upgrade coastal infrastructure. We had a process, research and development. In the labs, we test it, and then we produce a product. This creates the lab, the prototype, to deployed project timeline. Next, we had a design and implementation of an FRP reinforced innovative seawall section for North Bay Village. North Bay Village is a man-made island in Biscayne Bay currently dealing with sea level rise and the problems associated with it: saltwater inundation, flooded coastal homes, and growing concern for the community's future. Additionally, Sea Hive, an innovative modular structural element for application of green-gray infrastructure solutions in coastal areas delivering significantly enhanced ecological function. Here we have a product, the FRP reinforced seawall, being deployed to North Bay Village in coordination with public and private partnerships. And this is where it culminates, in deployment of the innovative solutions. Once deployed, we're able to provide more examples of our actions matching our words, reinforcing the idea that is a problem solver and a community leader. So from the lab to private and public partnerships, we take the product, deploy it to the communities that we partner with, and the result is an increased infrastructure resilience. Now, for the outreach portion, we take the problem, the process, and findings. So we teach our communities, we are creating real-world solutions to real-world problems. And although our work remains in a constant state of improvement, there is ample room for students and stakeholders to provide valuable input in the direction they want to see their community grow. We tell them, these are our community's problems, and they represent a fraction of the global issue. This is our approach to coastal environmental threats and what we at are doing about them. And this is where we can use you, the students, the stakeholders, this is where we can use your help. One thing we needed to do was rethink quote unquote students. Emerging technologies and innovations in communications have had significant impacts on the educational mission of academic institutions at all levels, from early childhood to continuing adult education. Remote learning and online classes have facilitated outreach, education, and application in ways that were not as available only several short years ago. Along the way, through these efforts, we have also grown to recognize the need to better define who are the quote unquote students. From our perspective, students no longer refer to those only in middle and high school, but are also from all types of demographics, including parents, mid-career professionals, and those curious of the subject matter. One of the indirect impacts we saw from meeting with middle and high schoolers was the information trickle up from students to parents. Parents go to work, so they do not always have the TV on, and they don't always stay engaged in areas they don't interact with regularly. Many parents take an interest in what their children learn at school, so during these discussions at home, parents might ask about guest speakers from the university, talking about things like flooding, hurricanes, and waste pollution. Our programs are designed in a way to facilitate a good understanding of the larger impacts so students can explain it to others, like their parents. The parents then become students themselves. When we make it about the audience as children, adults, individuals, families, workers, academics, or more broadly as a community, when we talk about how this impacts them and their homes directly and financially, they take an increased interest, a striking example of the relevancy of the information and the need to ensure it reaches all corners of South Florida. Everything about this program is meant to build upon itself and further enrich every layer of involvement. We start with a mission to improve our community. It begins with our absolute devotion to improving upon the principles and ideas involved with sustainability and resiliency. UM's highly talented and well-diversified research faculty with a broad range of research investigations serves as a resource for this initiative, while also providing an opportunity and highlighting significance of interdisciplinary research as key contributor to community resilience. Observations gathered and citizen feedback from deployed community projects serves as guiding principles for subsequent studies. We are committed to disseminating this information to everyone in our community, starting with the next generation of problem solvers. Through agency building and some motivation, we hope to inspire the next generation to make minor improvements over time, leading to generational, social, and cultural shifts in how we view and create a resilient environment. We want to create the ideas that influence the future, inspire the next generation to take on these challenges, and create solutions for themselves. While the focus is on the next generation, current professionals want to participate in this growing field as well. Providing additional Pathways for Industry Success allows to cover every aspect from inception to deployment as a leader in a positive way. We will continue to develop and improve upon our outreach as our research, applications, and community dictates, and we look forward to having a larger impact as the program matures. Finally, this is why we do what we do. As Floridians, we are exposed to environmental threats, hazards, and shocks that many coastal communities around the world deal with as well. Putting thought into action in communities like North Bay Village validates key portions of our program goals, providing solutions to global problems starting here at home. Passing our knowledge on to the next generation, show them that these environmental threats can be mitigated smartly and how they can help themselves, their communities, and the world by understanding and improving upon resiliency principles as well. And with that, I want to thank you all for participating and viewing our presentation, and we look forward to hopefully collaborating with some of you in the future.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nader Azab. I am an associate professor of architecture at the University of the Bahamas. I'm here today with Brittany Sherman and Julian Pinder, two of my undergraduate students, presenting our topic for today, which is related to co-housing and the Bahamian community. So let's share our presentation. Our topic today is revisiting the Bahamian community, co-housing as a sustainable lifestyle. We start our presentation with these two short quotes. The first one says, "Taking a look around my neighborhood, Pinewood Gardens, New Providence, it is quickly observed that there is no real sense of community. The term neighbor is just a word used to describe the house on the side of you, leaving the community with no true taste of togetherness." This was said by a 20-year-old Bahamian. On the other side, we can hear a 44-year-old Bahamian saying, "I can remember the close-knit communities growing in this island nation. We lived in close proximity to neighbors, family members, and places of employment. Extended families had large open yards to foster interaction among relatives and neighbors alike. Dependence on others to help rear children was a common. Everyone attended the same churches and participated in the same activities. People knew their neighbors and trusted them. Crime as a result of these factors was very low." The context for this presentation, as you might know, the archipelago of the Bahamas spans over 100,000 square miles of ocean, starting just 50 miles off the coast of Florida. It is made up of 700 islands and keys. Of those islands, 30 only are inhabited by people. New Providence, which is shown here in the map, Nassau, the capital city, is an island 21 miles east to west and 7 miles north to south at its widest points. This is a map for New Providence Island, Nassau, Bahamas, the capital of Bahamas. The 2010 census shows that there are approximately 250,000 people residing on the island, and the entire Bahamas having a total population of 351.461 population. This is a map showing different parts of the Bahamas, of Nassau. Over the years, as the population grew, and in the 50s, the population ventured further south, as we see here. The government made land affordable and planned subdivisions with low-cost homes for families who could afford them. In the early 90s, there was a development explosion on the southern side of the island as urban sprawl became a hot topic, and home ownership became a priority of the families trying to escape the rising crime rates of overpopulated over-the-hill communities. Nassau, like many developing countries, is now subject to urban sprawl. Many families have and continue to move to the south, eastern, and western side of the island. The majority of the low to medium income families are moving to the south. We know that low-income families are at greater risk to display negative social connotations among each other, and in the case of Nassau, it is not different. From a survey done in the 2014, these are some information about the situation. We see here that 40% they lack wastewater management practices. 11 only have connections to sewage systems. Safety perception and crime rates is pretty high in Nassau. Natural disasters and climate change also as well are affecting Nassau a great deal. 60% of infrastructures are at risk. 61% of homes are at risk. These are images of urban sprawl over the island, just to see subdivisions, land lots sold to developers and built just sprawling all over the place with no intention for the urban fabric or the urban design quality of the space. Many of these neighborhoods are growing at rapid pace, and its residents have no place for individuals of all ages to engage in conversation and basic interaction. People don't know each other. Most of residents have better relationships with people who reside out of their immediate communities. Honestly, how much of us can say that our best friend lives down the street? Not to mention, speaking specifically about New Providence, Nassau, there is an issue with affordable housing. Rent and home prices, as well as the price of land, is high in comparison to family islands. Now we go to our academic context. I would like to start with the University of the Bahamas social capital concern. The University of the Bahamas, as most institutions, don't tend to invest in newbie students and faculty for being the most valuable asset for the university and the Bahamian community. These are some of our students at the studio working. Just to give you an idea about the way we interact or we used to interact before COVID-19. So what UB did, first planning and coordinating joint courses with other schools that show interest in the issues of interest, like climate change, which is the big issue now. Venue number one, we had a cooperation with Delft University, the Netherlands. We signed an MOE with Delft Technical University of the Netherlands to study the impacts of Dorian on Grand Bahama and how future storm effects could be mitigated. A research team, professors, and graduate students from Delft University visited the island, accompanied by UB students and faculty. We all spent a week investigating the situation on land. All-day workshops were conducted and studio work took place. And after COVID-19, cooperation continued virtually online. That's a brief account for the venture. Actually, this venture ended up with a couple of publications from the side of Delft University and a couple of virtual online juries with students and a couple of master theses for graduate students at Delft University. Venue number two, we had also cooperation with UNCC at Charlotte. And being locked down, an agreement was signed with the university to run a course from their campus addressing climatic change and architectural intervention to perceive and construct an off-the-grid shelter on the island of Eleuthera, which is another island. UB students joined UNCC students in combined teams to tackle the design problem. And honestly, the credit to run the course goes to Professor Jose Gamez from UNCC. I was only coordinating and sharing my views and input as a representative of the UB side. Add to that, an unannounced concern among all faculty was there to include storm and sea rise level mitigation measures to all UB design studios as the main criterion for developing all design proposals. At least for me as a newcomer to the Bahamas, all my studios since Dorian always start with emphasis on climate change issues and the need to tie our design problem definition as well as solutions to current pressing issues. This presentation is an example of that. It is built on the work of a couple of undergraduate students, Brittany Sherman and Julian Pinder at the University of the Bahamas, Studio 4, Year 3, spring of 2021, this current semester. The whole class was given the opportunity to explore issues that relate to their close community. They were given some general topics to consider without pinpointing a specific topic. This specific group chose to handle housing issues, and the concern was affordability for middle-income class Bahamians. Throughout discussions, they encountered issues of affordability, community relations, safety, and intergenerational relations. However, no clues about co-housing were ever made so far. With some instructions, students started to explore the concept of communal housing in literature and showed high interest in developing such a project in the Bahamas as a proposed solution for some housing problems on the sea. Throughout the journey, also economic activities in the Bahamas, such as farming, were pushed to the scene to explore. As we might know, Bahamas economy is mainly based on tourism and international financial services. Farming, fishing, etc. are not a goal for current policies, thus pushing prices for food products above people's capabilities. And you can ask me about that. On the way to understand the topic, both students did some case study analysis for co-housing groups, both in Europe and USA to start with. Then they developed their own survey to explore the appeal for living in such a community among Bahamians. And here are some families for such a survey where you can search for the gender, age bracket, ownership, purposes for not owning a house, if not, you live with dependents or not, how many people, how the size of your household, preference for owning a house or not, what do you value about your living space, can you see yourself living and sharing space with others, do you like to live closer to older members of your family or not, the meanings and the value for community for each of these subjects, the value also for producing your own food, some findings about prices for homes, and you can see here the issue of affordability is a big issue in Nassau, Bahamas specifically. And here we can briefly state our problem, either related to community, affordability, crime, lack of open spaces, lack of sharing spaces, etc. The vision for these two students was by putting in place affordable to purchase or rent, controlled, sustainable green housing, we can begin to solve this issue. It offers younger households like first-time home owners or single ones an opportunity to own a home they can afford and maintain themselves. Because these homes might or should be green and sustainable, they will be able to harvest their own energy through solar energy, which powers their green community. Also, opportunities for other sustainable measures can also be put in place to minimize the impact on public resources a new community might grow. And so they started, and we can say, breaking grounds and initiating co-housing groups. To start with, let's say co-housing definition, it denotes a community of private homes created intentionally in a clustered format in which space has been shared. The origin is in Denmark in the later part of the 1960s, and research shows that co-housing might help solve several physical, mental, and developmental issues in children, the elderly, and adults. These are the main basics of co-housing community. It has a common house, it has shared facilities, there are some community bylaws. It might encompass organic farming, and then we have, of course, private homes, and then we can discuss the economics of a co-housing. The group formation is studio course members and their families, add to those, including myself, of course, including those 4 to 6 households as rentals for generating income, and 4 units for the elderly. Co-housing basics and how applied to the human being. These are the household names, number of household size, age of persons, and they discussed also productivity within the community, and adding the dimension of farming or vertical farming to the community might be an option. And here we will try to explore what is vertical farming and what are the crops that could be raised in such a farm, especially in the Bahamas. We started by picking up a site for the project, started doing the programming, the common house, the shared facilities, the community bylaws, organic farming if possible, private homes, and economics of this thing. And they were thinking of having like a farmer's market monthly or weekly so that they can raise income for the community. So these are the components of our co-housing. I'm calling it ours because I'm a member of this group. And then they started developing the concept, and actually work is under development right now, and we'll be ready to share by the second week of April or so. They had a concept, I'm not sure whether it's going to proceed with this or not, which is getting an inspiration from mangroves as a biomimicry design approach to the project. This is the Miro boards that started developing in line together for programming and thinking about each section of the project. And then here they shared with me some design alternatives, ideas, and inspirations. Number one is a hybrid one, single family homes and row houses clustered or around green and open spaces. Another one is grouping row houses around a central open space where they have a pool, farming, etc. And then this is a latest concept that they shared with me like a couple of days ago, where they have their entrance, they have a parking, and then they have a buffer of greenery. And then you have farming area, and then you have all the homes clustered around central place with a main common house with parking next to it. Of course, this is going to be, this was assessed and some corrections were made to that for the quality of the inner space or the main space of the community. This is an isometric with that 3D with that idea. And then here it comes to some reflections on our journey. I would say that now and then terms rise to the surface as buzzwords for a while. Of all these, the term community is and will be the key to realizing human settlements. However, one shouldn't take the term literally as being physical. Other dimensions apply to the equation of knowledge and action. New ideas to a specific community could and should be introduced in academia. This will give us an opportunity to explore and validate its credibility. Although it might seem not doable at the moment, passion, extensive research, and creativity would sure make a huge difference. Younger generations are more prone, from my perspective, to change and exploring new ventures. Although the survey that we have seen before about communal housing in the study doesn't fully support the venture so far. distance really matters? Can we survive in architecture without real studios? We were always thankful of virtual learning in architecture. Is that still the case? Actually, virtual studio work is tough, but certainly doable. It needs more committed personnel, more time, and stable infrastructures. Importance of learning infrastructures that would guarantee smooth virtual learning and communications. The role of inter-university virtual cooperation and the unlimited possibilities for learning. Last but not least, climate change is already happening and we have to be well prepared. Matthew, Dorian, and future disasters are just signals for what might be worse. Academia has a lot to do through research, civic engagement, and policy making. Our young students are the future professionals and policy makers. They have to master their tools. The most is the ability to envision and create a better, more resilient, and sustainable future. Thank you all, and we're open for your questions, Dean, Brittany, and Julian. And these are some references to my presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Esteban Petruzzello. I'm an assistant professor of professional practice at Miami Harvard Business School. I'm a health economist, and I teach several courses at one of them in our new Master of Science in Sustainable Business. And let me tell you a little bit about my research. Some of my research is related to the demand for goods that can be harmful for the consumers or for other individuals, and the connections with public policy that those goods have, particularly in the context of the economics of addiction. And separately, I have also been working on the cost burden of certain conditions in terms of lost labor productivity and increased medical expenditures, and also the cost-benefit analysis of medical treatments, specifically in the context of severe to profound hearing loss, right? And there's a common theme, that joins these two separate areas of research, right? In both cases, we have costs that are immediate, right? When you are trying to quit smoking, for example, or when an individual gets a cochlear implant. But you will, of course, have benefits. Those might not be immediate, although they could be, but certainly they will arrive in the medium run and in the long run, and they can be extremely significant compared to the costs and in general, right? And this is a feature that is, of course, present in resilience investments, which is one of the reasons we are all here in this conference, right? So the key objective of this presentation is to try to discuss some of the ways in which resilience can be and should be, I would say, included in a sustainable business curriculum, right? Let me say right off the bat that there's, of course, a very, very important role for government regulation here. And in fact, any sustainable business program is going to discuss how the firms manage that regulation, both because they have to comply with that regulation and also because they might want to act preemptively to try to avoid further regulation. But the focus of today's talk is going to be on market-driven social and environmental goals that provide benefits to society while at the same time increasing the value to the firm, right? Market forces are extremely important in driving corporate environmentalism and in general, of course, and then in particular resilience investments. But sometimes they are overlooked to some extent in curricula that might focus a little bit more on the public policy side, right? Additionally, this is important, in my opinion, not just for students that are pursuing a specialized program, but really for any student that might be interested in these or related topics, sustainability issues really are no longer the exception, they are certainly the rule. So let's start. Let's start with disaster preparedness, right? For example, some companies build bunkers or silos to try to make distribution of their products easier in case of a hurricane or some other extreme weather event, right? These and other investments in resilience are, of course, costly, right? But they have a lot of benefits, some completely straightforward, and others that are a little bit more nuanced, perhaps. Among the straightforward ones, I would say, this definitely helps the community, since, they will have essential products available sooner in the aftermath of this hurricane or other extreme weather event. And it helps the company in an obvious way because they can sell that product. But there are more advantages. Let's look at the competition, right? If the competition does not have equivalent arrangements, there's going to be a large increase in the market share of the company that does. And this would be good, even if it's temporary after the event, but sometimes this has lasting effects. So the market share might end up being higher than it was before the event. But the most interesting advantage, in my opinion, can really occur before the event takes place. Again, if not every company is making these investments in resilience, this is going to be something that differentiates the company, differentiates the product or the service that the company is selling in the eyes of some of the customers, right? It's not even important that it's on the eyes of all of the customers, but that there's any sort of subset that really values this, that's going to be already important for the company. One of the most important things we discuss in the microeconomics of sustainability course that I teach is that sustainability initiatives can act as a product differentiation strategy, right? Making your product different in a way that these customers favor can allow the company to get better margins, right? The company is selling a product or producing something that matches the tastes of the consumers better. So more economic surplus is being generated, and this, of course, is convenient both for the consumer and for the firm. And I think it's informative to look at it from the other perspective, right? If we have a product that is not different than the rest, competition is fiercer because the products are closer substitutes, and that is going to drive the value for the company down because it reduces market power. Now, a second separate topic that I wanted to discuss today is related to supply chains, right? So one of the largest problems for the companies during extreme weather events and other disasters is a potential supply chain interruption. Many times there are very important economic advantages that arise from having only one supplier or a small set of suppliers, for example, in the shape of bulk discounts. However, this is, of course, risky. A disruption that would occur is going to be very costly in these situations. Many companies recognize this risk, and they can do a couple of things about that. One of them is they can have a diversified set of suppliers from different areas. And that's going to allow them to minimize the disruption following the event. That's one thing. A separate thing is that this might actually encourage vertical integration, right? Bringing certain aspects of the supply chain under common ownership. And this has several economic advantages, even without bringing up an extreme weather event. In particular, the integrated structure is internalizing some negative effects, and this can be convenient for the companies that are integrated in terms of their profits. But in the case of an extreme weather event, it can allow the company to minimize the disruption in some situations because, for instance, they have the capability of temporarily manufacturing the good themselves. That's interesting because they don't depend on the other suppliers in this emergency situation that occurs in the area where those suppliers would be. These sort of issues would be discussed in a sustainable supply chain course, where you can also see another important factor that comes into play, which is that these companies that make investments in resilience, they can put some pressure on the suppliers or other links in the chain to make those investments themselves too. This is particularly important because we can have a virtuous domino effect along the supply chain. Now, one of the main ways in which investments in resilience take place is through public-private partnerships. And perhaps the best example here are resilience impact bonds. The focus here is to try to finance capital investments in resilient infrastructure systems. With these instruments, the interest rates can be lower if the investment is related to, for example, protecting the shoreline. And from the perspective of the investors, these investors that are interested in impact bonds in general are going to be focused on ESG issues, but are going to pay attention also to financial performance. They're going to expect a return, even if it's not necessarily large. This is not unlike potential solutions to imperfect credit markets that might prevent entities to have access to the funds that are necessary to finance the upfront cost of any sort of investment associated to sustainable issues. This is something we discuss in my course in the context of underinvestments in energy efficiency, but that is discussed much more in detail in a sustainable finance course. Access to capital is one of the key market forces that drives corporate environmentalism. From the perspective of the borrower, there's one more thing, right? This can have a lot of value because coastal protection, seawalls, they can reduce the cost of insurance. These investments are reducing the potential damage, and that can show up in a reduction in the premiums that are paid. There's a different type of relationship that also presents what we could call win-win opportunities. And I'm thinking about NGOs now, like Nature Conservancy, for example. NGOs can be extremely relevant partners of companies because they might bridge an information gap there. They can allow the company to credibly convey how environmentally friendly their products and processes are, or specifically how much they are investing in resilience. So it's something that the company can benefit from. This is going to drive value to the company. And once again, we can look at this from the negative perspective. The NGOs can attempt to punish in some way companies that are not being environmentally responsible. And then last, but definitely not least, it's not all about the company and the consumers. We need to talk about another agent here, and those are the workers. And I have several things to say about them. These investments in resilience, for example, disaster preparedness in particular, can certainly increase employee satisfaction even before any event occurs. And this is extremely important. Again, it's helpful to look at it from the negative side, lack of preparedness, poor planning. We're talking about bad job characteristics, right? And there's a very important theory in labor economics that is called the theory of compensating wage differentials, lots of evidence that backs it up. And the theory says something completely straightforward. It says that all else equal, bad job characteristics like lack of preparedness have to be associated with higher wages, not lower, higher wages. If not, the workers would just try to go to similar jobs that don't have those bad features. Therefore, bad corporate environmental performance or bad occupational safety on average will mean higher costs for the companies. So solving those issues can actually be a cost-saving action. There can even be a stronger link between resilience and labor productivity. Things that are good for the community where a company is are good, of course, for the workers that live in that community because they might improve the conditions of the community and therefore the workers that are there. Here, a more general example might help. Some companies find that providing compensation that is above market clearing levels can actually be helpful in increasing the productivity of some of their workers, because for some of these workers, the extra compensation has a positive impact in terms of improving nutritional outcomes or increasing access to healthcare or both. And these two are incredibly important, not only for the individual, of course, but also in terms of increasing labor productivity. So the company benefits directly from that. And then there's one more nuanced advantage of investments in resilience and other investments in general that present sustainability elements when we think about not really the workers necessarily, but the potential workers. When we think about the company trying to hire. These sort of investments have the potential to attract and retain better workers, more productive workers. And let me tell you the mechanism here. So one of the major problems that the companies face when they are trying to hire is that many desirable characteristics of the employees are either unobservable or they are very hard to observe. Let me give you one example: being future oriented. That's very important for some companies, very hard to observe in general. Another one would be placing a lot of value on continued education. So this is an information gap, again, and anything that the company can do to try to bridge this information gap can be valuable. And the environmental commitment of the company can actually help with this. Because if there's any sort of positive correlation between the preferences of the worker, a worker that values these commitments and these investments, and the fact that they are more future-oriented, and there's some evidence that shows this link in particular, these types of job characteristics have an important role screening the workers, right? The company tries to hire and they present these investments, they mention them, they are known, that's a separate issue, right? And the workers that are more future-oriented can be attracted to this feature of the company, and they might be more likely to want to work at that company. So the company is effectively attracting a more qualified or better, more productive worker because of these investments or environmental commitments that they have. Okay. So these are all the things I wanted to talk about today. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conference. My asynchronous self is logging off now, and my synchronous self will be with you there shortly.
Thank you all for very compelling presentations and your willingness to stick with us through some unexpected technical glitches. I think Zoom has brought much into our lives as we navigate the pandemic, but some of the technology blips that occur as a function of doing everything online are somewhat unexpected and also always give me pause for a little bit of laughter and levity. So I have some questions to start off conversation. And I think my main interest in hearing from each of you are what are the key lessons learned from the work that you have done? And let's maybe start with Esber and Ali G, just going in the order of the presentations.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Esber Andiroglu. I'm an associate professor of practice in Department of Civil Architectural Environmental Engineering. I hold a secondary appointment at School of Architecture, so very excited to be part of this symposium today. So, Dr. Kobetz, in response to your question, the more we do this, what we're finding is that there are no boundaries and we can't do enough. So the canvas is so wide and broad, and from our interactions in the community, what we're finding is that the stakeholders or students are really varying. So they include anywhere from lower school kids all the way up to retirees who are really trying to catch up with technological innovations that are emerging from research and how to integrate those into workforce or into solutions in response to these very serious and ever-evolving demands for, for resilience. To expand a little bit, one thing we see, for example, even if you take elementary school kids, often within the underrepresented communities, the webinars and camp type activities that we have hosted for them in response to programs sponsored by Miami-Dade County, we find that a lot of those kids come spend an hour or two with us, get exposed to innovation and research in our labs. They go home and they discuss some of what they've learned with their parents. And some of these parents who may not have access to the same level of educational means or even, through the language barriers, then end up getting informed. So a couple of years ago, I was part of a project in the community of Little Haiti for coastal resilience, where we specifically looked at historically significant buildings or residences, architecturally significant, and how they could be brought to compliance or be more resilient with minimal means, and what could each household residence do in response to that. And these type of interactions, the lecture sessions or lunch and learns or webinars that we did, that's how we found that we reached out to a lot of these folks in the, those type of communities where otherwise they would not really have ability to access. Similarly, on the higher level research, we have so much going on, and we're very proud to be part of that at the University of Miami. And often we find that a lot of the research that we produce, we publish, but may not necessarily get disseminated into our communities and actually provide a response to much needed problem areas. So through pilot projects that we're integrating into classrooms, into both undergrad curriculums, graduate level curriculums, and applied research projects for our upper level PhD students, for example, we're finding that that's how our community stakeholders are finding the relevance and making the connection and expressing interest and therefore supporting those type efforts. So we just have to keep doing this more and more. And I think we are on the right path, and we just need our communities and all the stakeholder supports. And in a way, we want everyone to become students, not just the traditional students.
I love that, Esber. I didn't know if Ali, you wanted to add anything, or Austin, to the comments that Esber shared. It's amazing when we have forums like this that there's this opportunity that allows for this cross learning and the ability to see all of the similarities that many of us employ in methodologies pursuing our own work in diverse communities. And I'm really struck by that.
Sure.
Ali or Austin? Hi, Ali.
Sure. Thank you. I don't think you are able to see my my video. I don't know why, but thank you, Dr. Kobetz, for moderating this interesting session. I'm gonna just echo what Esber said. I think he summed it up very well. And I just want to add a little to what Esber said, and is that in my experience working with K-12 student on STEM, from my own personal experience, I had a few students who decided to come to UM as a result of the exposure they had to the UM science and engineering summer camps that we held a few years prior. And when I talked to the students, they emphasized the importance of these outreach activities, and also that some of them don't even know what STEM is and what STEM can do to basically mitigate some of the issues we have now, whether it is coastal resilience, whether it is fire or earthquakes, you can name it. So I think early exposure to STEM is going to pay off greatly in the future. Thank you.
Nader, do you want to talk about some of the lessons learned from your very compelling work?
Hi, everyone.
And some of the challenges also, because you were working with institutions cross-nationally. And, I think that sometimes introduces different barriers to successfully completing work and also developing shared goals for implementation. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, actually, I've added all my reflections in my presentation. So I guess it's interesting that we were all, as architects, resentful of this online virtual learning process. But when we were forced, I guess it's a success. From my perspective, it's a success. Maybe some infrastructure issues, some learning issues that we keep learning on the road. And I would love to hear from my student, Julian Pinder, who's with us, and he and Brittany Sherman, they're the ones who, the three of us, we shared doing this presentation. So I'd love to hear from him.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Julian Pinder. I'm standing in for the group that's working on the co-housing project for my Studio 4 class. Unfortunately, Brittany couldn't be with us this morning because she typically has to work, and that says to the affordability issue we have in the Bahamas. But one thing that we have learned is that we didn't expect is that the Bahamian community or the Bahamian people are more open to a communal housing aspect or communal housing design that we anticipated. As the years went on, the Bahamians typically moved away from the community aspect because it became more isolated as crime and other political aspects of the Bahamian culture affected the community. So it was a breath of fresh air to see that a lot of Bahamian people are still interested in fostering a community mindset within the way they interact with those around them, and creating a community in which you can benefit from other people's work as well as contribute in a way where it makes everything sustainable and overall a productive or a substantial way in which we can live and foster relationships and a community aspect where we can continue to grow off of each other. So that's something that we learned, and that was surprising to us. But one of the challenges, especially within the design process, as Professor Nader typically tells us, has been telling us for the past few weeks, when we have to think about affordability, we have to remember that land is expensive. Land is very expensive. So that is one of the struggles we have, because when we think of something where there's going to be a large community and you want so many sources of income and interesting things within a community, you struggle to think on a smaller scale, and you try to put everything in as you could possibly as you possibly can. So it's hard to kind of think on a smaller scale. So that's something we're working on, and like he said, we're continuing to work on more concepts, design concepts, and looking to improve upon what we showed you today. So as the semester comes to an end, we're gonna continue to work together on finalizing a community concept, a communal concept where it can possibly work and it can help our society with our affordability issues. So that's some of the hopes and what we've learned so far.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Esteban, anything that you want to add about the lessons learned from your research?
Yes, very brief. I think that the key takeaway is that it's good business to pursue investments in resilience and investments in sustainable issues more in general. This is a very important notion. You know, sometimes the interests of companies and the environment clash. That's obvious, right? But sometimes it doesn't, and that allows the company to do more of that. And so it's a very important thing that needs to be considered. And there are several, in particular, economic avenues for that connection. That's my area, but more in general, marketing and supply chain issues, finance. So it's very, very important to consider how convenient for the companies it is to be focused on resilience.
Excellent. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I'm hoping that some of our participants will share their questions so that I can ask them to the distinguished panel. In the meantime, I was really curious if Austin or Ali G or Esber could speak about what they believe the next steps are in the work that they've been doing. It's extraordinarily comprehensive. It seems to be achieving its intended impact. Where do you go and how do you scale what you've developed for other geographies and other communities?
Well, I can take a stab at it, and perhaps my colleagues can chime in as well. So as the next step, really, this is a I'm going to say multi-step process or multi-dimensional next step. So one is as we identify community-based challenges or problems, and we start focusing on solutions, we're doing this in multiple ways. One, we're taking some of these problems, bringing into classroom, and getting our students engaged in doing the research first, understanding the problem or the question, and then arriving at proposed solutions so that they're very much engaged, not only during the class exercise, but that passion that they kind of develop during that process keeps them going forward once they leave us and they graduate or they complete that course, they're in the workforce, they're working in their professional environments, so that they can continue to pursue that. So because they had that exposure and experience in the classroom setting, it kind of empowers them. While we're doing that, often it's these students themselves really, through their research investigations and literature review, identify additional research questions. So that kind of ties us to the next step in this, which is developing research proposals that directly respond to these new questions and seeking funding to carry on higher level research. Often, like I'll give you an example. A few years ago, one of my courses, Sustainable Construction, it typically consists of cross-disciplinary students. So I usually get students from civil engineering, environmental engineering. This year I have 3 of your students, Esteban, I think sustainable business, master's program, real estate development, construction management. So all of these are students coming from different, very background. Austin actually was one of my students from environmental science and policy a few years ago. Kind of helps bring a whole new perspective to some of these community-based challenges or problem areas and the solutions that the students end up devising. So as one of my research projects as a ULink team member that focuses on next generational coastal structures, for example, emerged out of that kind of an exercise 3 years ago in my class when we looked at what can we do with wastewater. And some of the civil engineering PhD students said, can we use wastewater for mixing concrete, for example? And what can that do to the biophilic nature of concrete mixtures? And can that have sustainability implications on water conservation or new material innovations? And from that evolved our projects on next generational coastal structures. So that's the kind of a pathway. And then taking that now and linking it to an actual community. So we're experimenting with actual pilot prototype projects in collaboration with North Bay Village right now to kind of exercise some of these developments on a real community setting. So once we are able to build some of those, and so far we've built a 50-foot section of seawall cap using some of these innovative materials in North Bay Village. Now we're working on, for example, another one in Wahoo Bay in collaboration with City of Pompano Beach, where we're building these other engineered modular structures that will hold mangrove plantations and create a recreational park, science park for K through 12 grade students to participate in, while our PhD and MS students would be monitoring the installations and their progress or resilience in that environment. So that again is helping us deploy some of this in the community, and by exemplifying how they perform, our ultimate goal is that, hey, if we can demonstrate it in North Bay Village or in Pompano Beach, then let's look at what are other similar environments globally and extend that presence. And along the way, though, the stakeholder engagement is enormous. It includes from bankers. I'm a member of this Blue Bond Club. There's another presentation later on this afternoon, I think, on that topic that offers creative funding and financing opportunities for resilience projects. So all this, really comes together on so many fronts. And often what I do on my end is really search through all the research work, starting at the UM. We have so much going on across all units from my colleagues, and find research outcomes that can be used as an applied solution in our, so taking the fundamental level research to applied research, and then ultimately deployment as a community-based solution, first demonstrated in our local communities, and then hopefully globally. So along the way, we also need to, of course, deploy new programs, new courses, so that we can actually, deliver the next generation of professionals or educators who are well equipped to, tackle this.
Excellent, Esber. I'm so inspired by your work. Ali, do you have any comments to add, or Austin?
I think Esber is usually the one who is better equipped to explain things, and I think I don't have anything more to add to it.
So Nader, I have a question. What lessons from your work do you think could be applied to someplace other than the Bahamas? In other areas that are also very much struggling with issues related to resiliency?
Actually, all what we're doing here, it could be applied, but with some in-depth understanding for the different contexts that we're dealing with. And actually, when we're working now with UNCC on another course, community development, and we have teams from the Bahamas and other schools, including UNCC, and we are working on projects in Charlotte and in the Bahamas. And so we can see the differences between the both contexts, putting in mind the main goals that we're putting, which is resiliency, sustainability, and climate change. So it is doable everywhere, as long as you're correctly trying to understand the nature of the problem. It's not about the tools that you have, it's about how you understand the problem that you're dealing with.
Great answer. What about you, Esteban? The work that you're doing, where do you see this going next?
So well, the work that I do has some connections, with resilience issues through my health economics work, but let me answer focused more on the presentation. I think that the future is integrating these sustainability issues more into the general curricula, right? The focus of my presentation was on graduate programs, right? But this is true also at the undergraduate level. This can be, as Esber was saying, with the creation of new courses, but it can also be with incorporating sustainability themes into existing courses. I know I do that. I try to do that with my own courses, and just because it's important. It's good business, which is important if you're teaching at the business school. And so I think that the step is to be serious about incorporating those issues in the curriculum.
Excellent. I wanted to give you each the opportunity to maybe ask a question of your fellow panelists, so that I'm not doing all of the talking and directing the conversation. You were all put in this panel together given the overlap between your work, even though it's focusing on different populations and different educational tools and epistemologies. And so before I ask another question, given that there's still none from the audience, I wanted to know if any of you have compelling things that you would like to learn from your colleagues on the panel.
Yeah, I have a quick question. How would you get the community involved in your projects? Because a note that I wrote actually today was, I'm thinking I have a summer course, and I'm planning to assign my students a project about minimalist housing in the Bahamas, because here, when you're talking about housing, whenever you say a small house, you're thinking of 1,000 square meters. And I'm thinking of like 25 or 20 square meters, 25 square feet, actually, square meters, they get confused. So how do you get your community involved in such a thing? How can you find your clients within the community? Does it need your outreaching, or you have by connections or relations, something like this?
I think, Nader, I think the first thing I would say is making yourself visible in your community and being active and participating in the needs or understanding the needs of your community and making that connection. So often I find that I've never been rejected. Every time I reached out to someone in the community and expressed the interest to collaborate or to participate, they're always welcoming. So, you know, the way you may initially envision that partnership may end up being kind of reconfigured and restructured based on that entity's needs or response, but the response is usually positive, but often they're not really aware in the work you may be doing if you're not really reaching out to them or inviting them. To give you an example, this semester in the same course that I teach, I attended a webinar that was hosted by Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience, which they host one during lunch hour once a month on various resiliency issues. And through the interaction in that webinar, the subject matter that they were discussing seemed so relevant to the topics that was in my class. I reached out after the webinar and said, could I invite you to join my class one day as a guest lecturer? So that translated to them actually tasking my students with a final project response in my class now, where the students are going to be delivering a webinar that we're going to open to public that in collaboration with Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience on the subject matter. It's on a specific community, for example, the Little River community in Miami-Dade County that is experiencing significant challenges from flooding to nutrient loading in the bay and impacting water quality. And you know, when the county came and gave the presentation to my students, one of the questions that they asked the students was how to elevate existing structures. And the students' response initially was, well, we understand it's possible, maybe we can do this, but this is going to cost a lot of money. Who is paying for this? How are we getting the funds for this? And the response back to the students was, well, that's an excellent question, but we're hoping that the interdisciplinary students that you are here, you're going to come back with that answer for us. And it was a very interactive exchange, and the students are passionately interested now. And our counterparts in the county are as excited to hear what the students are going to come back with. And all that happened just from that initial outreach. And, you know, so, you know, I know in Bahamas, Nader, last summer, we were engaged with the Bahamian government because they were actually looking at code adaptation needs for resilience, specifically in mechanical, energy, and occupancy codes of the international building codes. So they are very eager and open as well. So for that type of interaction. And, you know, to be honest, we would love to connect with you and you know, participate jointly on some of these moving forward.
And
That was a great. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I add something very quick?
Yes, of course.
I don't know if Nader is still on. To add to what Esber said, I think it is important for the community, whether we are talking about K-12 students or other age groups, that they see the relevance of the project to their everyday life. If they see that, all right, if I engaged in whatever project that you're talking about, I'm gonna learn something, and it's going to lead to some sort of benefits to my community. And it is, I think it is our job to make it relevant. Sometimes some of these concepts, I'm talking about STEM, but it's not limited to STEM, that it may seem dry and not very interesting or cool to K-12 students. And I think it is our job to make it so that they see STEM as a cool, as fun, and also basically helpful to their life. So I think it is our responsibility to make that connection. They may not see these things the way that we look at them. So we need to make sure that we can frame them in such a way that, first of all, they're understandable, and also they can relate to it. Thank you.
And for what it's worth, I'll just add another comment, because most of my research is grounded in the tenets of community-based participatory research, where I work collaboratively with key community stakeholders throughout the entire research continuum, from the conceptualization of the idea to the dissemination of findings. And the reason why I believe community participation is so essential is that I have an academic vantage point about what questions should be asked and the methodologies that should be employed to collect corresponding data. But my ideas don't always map on to the lived reality of communities. And so I find that it's really important to marry our respective expertise so that we can design research and scholarship that resonates with community priorities and ensures that the data that we collect is really valid and can lead to meaningful social change. Okay, so I'm getting a note from Emma, who is our producer, that we're getting ready to end this session. So I want to make sure that before we transition, that there are no additional questions or things that our panelists would like to share. Wanted to give everybody a minute or two to offer some closing comments, and we'll start with Esber, Ali, and Austin.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to be with everyone today and to share our work and continued efforts. Along these lines, we really do hope that we will continue to interact with all of you and continue to integrate as much of this work into more courses, more academic programs, curriculum development, and respond, to our local, regional communities' needs, and hopefully from there extend that as a global response to, reaching out to much broader audiences in the years ahead. Thank you again.
Nader?
Yeah, thank you. As you have seen, this is one of the difficulties. We have lost power here at home, so actually I lost connection with when I didn't hear the answer question. I heard only the first sentence, and so this is one difficulty that we have. I'm glad that I could make it today, and hearing those nice presentations and they give me a good inspiration for my future work in the Bahamas. Yeah. So thank you for Brittany and Julian for the cooperation, and looking forward for design alternatives for the project. Thank you.
And last but not least, Esteban.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kobetz, for your moderation. And these were great presentations, and I'm happy to have participated in this conference. And I look forward to continue conversations on resilience in general, and in particular, how it impacts sustainable business.